One group of police surrounds a building. A federal police commander inside is accused by some of his own officers of protecting criminals.
There have been many cases of corrupt police being sacked in Mexico. But this video shown on national television confirms in stark images what many Mexicans have long suspected, that police often work for the people they're meant to hunt down.
December 2023, a group of Mexican cops pulled off a daring heist by stealing 20 kilos of cocaine from a powerful cartel. But their greed came at a price, because what the cartel did next not only made their lives a living hell, it made them deeply regret crossing one of Mexico's most feared criminal empires. Here's some times cops messed with the wrong cartels. Kevin Gaxiola was a young Mexican police officer, and one of the unfortunate few who dared to steal from a cartel. But unlike his peers, Gaxiola reportedly wanted no part in that operation. In fact, he didn't even take a cut. But that didn't matter because being associated with the group was enough to put a target on his back. And when a Mexican cartel wants revenge, they get it, no matter the cost. So Gaxiola's fate was essentially doomed. Now before we get into these details of how Mr. Gaxiola got into that fix, we gotta rewind a bit and talk about why these cops thought stealing from a Mexican cartel, an organization forged on violence and bloodshed, was a good idea in the first place. It all began in mid-November 2023, down in Tijuana, Mexico, and if you know anything about Tijuana, you know it's not the type of place where messing with cartels is an ideal thing to do. With over 2.1 million residents, Tijuana is one of Mexico's deadliest cities, logging around 2,000 homicides a year. For context, that's nearly 5 times the murder rate of Houston, a U.S. city of similar size. Just 17 miles south of San Diego, Tijuana serves as a key artery for smuggling cocaine, meth, and fentanyl into the U.S., making it prime turf for heavyweights like the Sinaloa Cartel, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, and remnants of the Arellano Felix organization. Things particularly take a violent turn in 2017, when the murder rate nearly doubled, all driven by turf wars, and it hasn't let up since. But in all this bloodshed, Kevin Gaxiola's short-lived career as a cop would come to a tragic end. Eager to make a difference, Gaxiola joined the municipal police force right after graduating in 2023. His first real mission? A drug bust, targeting a cartel warehouse tucked inside a gated Tijuana neighborhood, standard issue for a city like this. But Gaxiola quickly found himself surrounded by the wrong kind of cops. Instead of collecting the 20 kilos of cocaine as evidence, the officers unanimously decided to steal it. Gaxiola, possibly influenced or outright pressured by his more seasoned teammates, went along for the ride. It was quick, quiet, and, for a moment, successful. The crew made off with a stash worth millions on the U.S. market, where a kilo of cocaine could fetch up to $30,000 wholesale, compared to that of $10,000 in Mexico. But the celebration was short-lived. A surveillance camera captured their getaway, specifically a police pickup truck loaded with those unmistakable, plastic-wrapped bricks of cocaine. That footage landed in the hands of the Sinaloa Cartel, particularly Zambada's faction, the one known for its brutal discipline and eyes everywhere intelligence networks. And best believe their response was fast and unforgiving. But before taking any drastic steps, they sought peace, something they don't usually do. Suspected cartel members began calling law enforcement, demanding they return the shipment or face serious consequences. This went on for a few days, and when those cops ignored their request, El Mayo sicarios orchestrated their first attack. On November 18, 2023, gunmen fired shots at the federal prosecutor's office in Tijuana with at least 30 rounds. The building was left scarred, though no one was injured. Yet that was just them still trying to make peace. Now, within an hour of not getting their shipment back, one of those officers allegedly involved in that theft was shot dead on a city street. Then, a couple of days later, on November 24th, more gunmen opened fire on the state prosecutor's office. 3 days later, on November 27th, a state detective connected to the stolen drugs was ambushed while filling up at a gas station. And despite being shot, he managed to drive a few feet before crashing into a column. His attackers sped off on a motorcycle. leaving him dead at the scene. By then, the cartel had declared war on those rogue officers. Realizing the danger, Gaxiola and the others scattered and went into hiding. Though, in a city like Tijuana, hiding from a cartel is about as effective as whispering during a gunfight. Also, a leaked audio recording reported by local outlets revealed an audio recording of a cartel sicario sending a final warning to Tijuana's police commander over the stolen cocaine. But the drugs never reappeared. Where they ended up is still unclear. Now, some believe that the officers sold it, possibly to a rival cartel. No one really knows. But what we do know is that Gaxiola's end was particularly gut-wrenching. January 27, 2024. His body's found naked and tortured next to a pickup truck in Tijuana. Beside him lay a man known as El Tommy, a member of that rival cartel suspected of buying the stolen drugs. Both had been killed by asphyxiation, a pretty grim method often used by cartels to send a message without leaving a bloody mess. Gaxiola's murder capped off the Sinaloa cartel's revenge spree, with 6 officers dead and 5 others brutally injured. And honestly, that whole war was staggering, even by Tijuana's brutal standards. Many residents called that theft a new low, adding that while police corruption isn't new to the city, that was a blatant act of provocation with deadly results. For decades, crooked cops have protected drug routes and extorted businesses. But this heist crossed a line that even the underworld doesn't tolerate.
Genaro Garcia Luna, once charged with leading the fight against narco-trafficking, was convicted Tuesday for accepting millions of dollars in bribes from the Sinaloa cartel.
In 2006, then-Mexican President Felipe Calderon tasked Genaro Garcia Luna to rebuild the country's law enforcement and go to war against the cartels. Sadly, in one of the most upsetting turn of events, Garcia Luna accepted millions of dollars as a bribe and protected the same cartels and drug traffickers he was supposed to prosecute. July 10, 1968, marked the birth date of Garcia in Mexico City. He completes his primary education and gets his first degree in Mexico before crossing into the U.S. to get his master's degree and establish himself as a well-known member of society. Garcia Luna started his career in intelligence at the Center for National Security and Investigation, but a few years later he's appointed to the Director of Federal Investigation Agency in Mexico. That was around the time that former President Calderon assumed office. Now, he saw Garcia Luna as a reputable man and charged him with the responsibility of cracking down on these drug lords as he officially launches the war on drugs. They say money doesn't buy loyalty, but we say it depends on how much is at stake. For Garcia, a few $1 million was enough to get him on the side of El Chapo and the Sinaloa cartel. But the real question is, how? From 2006 to 2012, Garcia Luna was Mexico's top law enforcement official, serving as Secretary of Public Security, and in that capacity, controlling Mexico's federal police force. So Garcia used that office to assist the Sinaloa cartel, providing inside information on drug raids, as well as trafficking that cocaine right into the U.S. by ensuring the safe passage of their shipments. In some cases, Garcia lent the Sinaloa cartel members of the police task force to act as bodyguards and escorts for El Chapo. Other times, he sent cartel police uniforms and badges to wear so they can get their product through checkpoints and airports. It was almost impossible for anyone to uncover Garcia's shady dealings until he attempted to please the people of Mexico with a fake stunt. December 9, 2005. Garcia leads the Agencia Federal de Investigación, aka the AFI, to a ranch where kidnapping victims were supposedly being held. In reality, the entire operation was staged. The alleged kidnappers, who were presented to the Mexican public as having been detained live at the scene, were detained the previous morning and were held illegally without being presented to a judge for almost 20 hours. Worst of all was the fact that one of the alleged kidnappers revealed that he was tortured into playing along. The story goes viral, drawing questions about Garcia's competence from international outlets, one of which was the New York Strike Force. This organization's a crime-fighting unit comprising federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies in the U.S., and they begin digging deep into Garcia's records, collecting as much data as they could on his whereabouts. One of their key findings came from a former Sinaloa cartel member who claimed to have personally handed Garcia thousands of dollars for information given to El Chapo. He also showed some of the locations where Garcia's transactions took place in Mexico and the U.S. This was added to another infamous drug lord's testimony of gifting Garcia a suitcase containing $3 million in 2005 and paying him another $3 to $5 million in 2007. Obviously, these claims could have been a lie to defame Garcia, but there seemed to be some truth to it, given Garcia lived a luxurious life, way above his paycheck. This guy had luxury cars and properties in Mexico, plus his family had inherited multiple real estate properties in the U.S. And by the time substantial evidence against Garcia was obtained, he was arrested. December 2019, Garcia Luna is arrested by federal U.S. agents in Dallas, Texas, on charges of drug trafficking and conspiracy that involved taking millions of dollars in bribes from El Chapo. This guy pled not guilty, despite the overwhelming evidence against him. Now, he hasn't been sentenced yet. However, the prosecutors believe he'll be getting the maximum sentence of life imprisonment. If you were to rank the dirtiest cops in Mexican history, Severo Flores Mendoza would easily be at the top of that list. This guy didn't just bend the law. He took it, flipped it upside down, and used it to play both sides, the government and a powerful Mexican cartel. And while he managed to get away with it for a while, eventually he paid the price. Flores Mendoza served as the chief of police in rural western Jalisco, a state that would be the stronghold for the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, better known as the CJ&G. These people have a reputation that's pretty dangerous, and it's considered the second most powerful in the country, right after its main rival, the Sinaloa Cartel. At the top of the CJ&G sits El Mencho, a name that sends chills everywhere. This guy's one of the most wanted drug lords in the world. But the CJ&G's meteoric rise to power wouldn't be just about firepower nor strategy. It had a lot to do with some cozy relationships within the Mexican police force. More specifically, the help they received from none other than Flores Mendoza. So, what did Mendoza do for him? Well, he was based in Ameca, a small town tucked in the rugged interior of Jalisco. It's strategically located off a key highway that connects the beach resort town of Puerto Vallarta with Guadalajara, the state capital. But here's where it gets even more serious. Mendoza wasn't just in charge of Ameca, he's also the regional coordinator of police chiefs for that entire area, overseeing law enforcement operations in Ameca and 13 other municipalities. They gave him control over more than half of the Jalisco police force. Now, this region, by the way, is long believed to be where El Mencho is hiding out. Despite the $10 million bounty on his head, he manages to stay one step ahead of every authority that's come looking for him. And when you look at the situation on the ground, it starts to make sense. Because when you're El Mencho, $10 million is pocket change, especially when you use it to buy loyalty from people like Flores Mendoza. In fact, it's likely he and his cartel associates paid Mendoza and his officers far more than that to simply look the other way. And that allowed CJ&G to freely move enormous quantities of cocaine and methamphetamine through Jalisco and across the border into the U.S. This is no small operation. The CJ&G is heavily militarized and known for its extreme violence. Their tactics look so professional and well-equipped that they've been mistaken for Mexican military forces. That's not an exaggeration. The group runs specialized divisions for different types of warfare, and they got their sicarios going through a training process that's been compared to the U.S. Special Forces. Every year, these guys rake in over $8 billion from cocaine sales and about $4 billion from meth, though some believe those figures are actually underestimated. So, in that context, paying off a police chief like Mendoza is barely a blip on the radar. For the CJ&G, that's just the cost of doing business. But things started to unravel when the U.S. government caught wind of Mendoza's cartel ties. In June 2022, the U.S. Treasury Department slapped sanctions on him. The official statement said that Mendoza had been feeding law enforcement intel to the CJ&G in exchange for bribes. That sanction effectively froze any properties or financial interests Mendoza had in the U.S. Normally, that kind of international action would trigger an arrest in Mexico too, but oddly, that never happened. And there's a very specific reason why. That same U.S. sanction also named another man, Julio Cesar Montero Pinzon. Now that's a name that makes a lot of cartel members nervous. Julio Cesar here has been planning and executing hundreds of high-profile assassinations for the CJ&G, often using military-grade weapons. Now he's closely tied to two other key cartel figures, Carlos Andres Rivera Varela, aka La Firma, and Francisco Javier Guidino Aro, aka La Gallina. Now together, these three acted as a direct link between El Mencho and the upper management of the CJ&G, issuing orders from extortion to kidnappings and assassinations. Here's why this matters. While the media and public become fixated on Montero Pinzon and his gruesome resume, Flores Mendoza quietly slips out of the spotlight. The attention shifted just enough to let him step down from his role, without handcuffs, without an arrest, and without so much as a press release from the Mexican government. And to this day, no one really knows where the hell Severo Flores Mendoza is. He's no longer in charge of anything in Jalisco, and there's no public arrest warrant, and the Mexican government has stayed completely silent about the U.S. sanctions. So, naturally, that leaves us with one big question. Where the f*** did Flores Mendoza go? May 28, 1999. Carlos Martinez was officially and permanently dismissed from the Tamaulipas State Police for his involvement in drug trafficking and cartel operations. But instead of lying low, Carlos doubles down. He goes full drug lord, and that decision would ultimately lead him to just one destination: his grave. We go back to 1955. Carlos Landin Martinez, better known by his alias El Puma, was born and raised in Reynosa, Tamaulipas, Mexico. And as a young boy, Carlos was dreaming of being a cop. He eventually made that dream come true and joined the Tamaulipas State Police, where he climbs the ranks to become the commander of the Homicide Division. And here's the twist: he's pretty good at it. So good, in fact, that he gains national recognition for his work. Now in the force, they gave him a nickname, El Puma Uno, or Puma One, a nod to his relentless pursuit of Tamaulipas' most dangerous criminals. He becomes sort of a legend here. Some even call him the Batman of Tamaulipas. But all that praise comes crashing down when the government uncovers damning evidence linking him to drug trafficking. We go to March 1997. The Mexican Attorney General's office issues an arrest warrant for El Puma and fellow police chief Pablo Villanueva Hernandez, accusing him of working with a Reynosa-based drug gang known as Los Nichos. But El Puma wasn't easy to bring down. He pulled some strings, buried that evidence, and managed to dodge arrests, at least for the time being. Between 1995 and 99, El Puma lived a double life. By day, he wore a badge of a police commander. At night, he's running with the Gulf Cartel, building a drug trafficking network into the U.S. And it wasn't just what he was doing, it was how he did it that made him nearly untouchable by both Mexican and U.S. authorities. His drug empire stretched into Graneno and Benitas, Texas, where his trafficking cells would team up with a family-led smuggling ring headed by Francisco Meza Rojas, a former McAllen police officer. For almost a decade, Carlos Martinez's operation moved massive amounts of narcotics from Mexico into the United States. Here's how it worked. Most of the drugs came in from Michoacan, moved through Tamaulipas, smuggled into South Texas via the Rio Grande. From there, they're handed off to middlemen at pre-arranged drop-off points. The middlemen meet up with traffickers, often in the parking lots of local McAllen businesses. And because one of El Puma's associates held power as a police chief in that area, there was barely any risk of getting caught. Now, once in the traffickers' hands, the drugs would be taken to various stash houses scattered across McAllen. From there, shipments are sent off to major cities including Dallas, Houston, Chicago, Atlanta, and New York. When the product's sold, couriers bring that money back into Mexico through Reynosa. The system funneled hundreds of millions of dollars into the pocket of both El Puma and the Gulf Cartel. But things take a turn when a new administration takes control of the Tamaulipas government. May 28, 1999. With more evidence piling up, Carlos Martinez was officially discharged from the police force. At first, that didn't change much. He continued drug operations and moved into the U.S. to live with his family. But 6 years later, U.S. authorities catch up with him. Investigators discover a drug smuggling tunnel that he'd built between Mexico and Texas, and additional links to the Gulf Cartel had emerged. Now completely exposed, Carlos ditches any pretense of a normal life. He stopped hiding and leans fully into the role of a drug lord. But he doesn't stop here. He transforms into a ruthless enforcer. Carlos started taxing independent traffickers who wanted to move drugs through his established smuggling corridors in the Tamaulipas municipalities of Gustavo Diaz Ordaz and Rio Bravo. Anyone who refused to pay, lost a shipment, or crossed him in any way was kidnapped, tortured, and executed on his orders. He becomes the Gulf Cartel's second in command and grew into a major threat to U.S. interests. That's when the U.S. decides to strike back. The DEA, in coordination with Mexico's anti-drug units, launch Operation Puma, a targeted mission with one goal: bring down Carlos Martinez. July 17, 2007. They got their break while shopping for watermelons inside an H-E-B supermarket in McAllen, Texas. Carlos is spotted by off-duty DEA agent Leonardo Silva. Despite being flanked by 2 bodyguards, El Puma wasn't hiding. Silva followed him after he left the store and alerted the McAllen Police Department. When authorities intercepted his vehicle, Carlos shockingly surrendered without a fight. The real surprise, though, came next. His trial lasted only 7 days before he was given life in prison. But due to a plea deal, that sentence was reduced, and he was scheduled for release on October 30th, 2029. Yeah, he never made it that far. On December 9th, 2021, Carlos Landin Martinez, aka El Puma, died in prison, closing the final chapter on a man who once straddled the line between law enforcement hero and cartel kingpin, and ultimately paid the price for both lives.
A murder at an exclusive shopping center in South Lake. What we've learned about the suspect vehicle and the victim's possible ties to the Mexican drug cartel.
6:30 p.m., May 22, 2013. Juan Jesus Guerrero Chapa and his wife pull into South Lake Town Square in Texas to do some casual shopping. They park their 2012 Range Rover just across from a yogurt shop, seemingly routine. What they didn't know was that under their SUV was a GPS tracker that had been quietly following their every move for weeks. Minutes after their arrival, 2 men in a rented Toyota Sequoia cruise past and park in a spot with a perfect view of that Range Rover. Everything's planned. At around 6:47 p.m., just as the couple returns to their car, one of the men, hood up, bandana over his mouth, steps out of that Sequoia and opens fire. Multiple shots ring out. Guerrero Chapa's hit and dies right there at the scene. This wouldn't be just another murder. It's the first homicide in South Lake since 1999. And more importantly, it marked the first time a cartel informant had ever been assassinated on U.S. soil. Turns out Guerrero Chapa wasn't who most people thought he was. On the surface, he appeared to be a well-off family guy. But behind that clean-cut image, he lived a high-stakes double life, serving as both personal attorney and trusted emissary of former Gulf Cartel kingpin Ociel Cárdenas Guillén, and an informant for the U.S. government. Chapa grows up in a middle-class household in the town of China, Nuevo León. He owns a gas station and builds a solid business reputation in Mexico, but by 2001 he's already on the radar of U.S. federal agents, thanks to his role as legal counsel for the Gulf Cartel. Then a dominant force controlling drug smuggling routes from northeastern Mexico into Texas and the southeastern U.S. Now his boss, Cárdenas, wasn't your average drug lord. This guy created Los Zetas as his own paramilitary wing, former soldiers turned enforcers. Cárdenas was arrested in Mexico in 2003 and eventually extradited to the U.S. But even behind bars, the web of influence didn't unravel. It only got more complex. That's where Guerrero Chapa comes in. This guy's viewed by U.S. agents as a prized asset, someone with direct access to the top brass of Mexico's narco world. You see, after Cárdenas' capture, they flipped Chapa, turning him into a high-level CI. He didn't just talk, though. He delivered. His cooperation helped seize over $50 million in assets from Cárdenas' plea deal, and he even transported cash himself, stuffed in the trunk of a car, no less. Meanwhile, the Zetas break away from the Gulf Cartel and become a cartel in their own right, ultra-violent, well-armed, and increasingly paranoid. They'd contributed a significant chunk of money to what they thought was a legal fund to help Cárdenas. Instead, they saw the whole thing was a ruse. Cárdenas was cooperating too. To them, it reeked of betrayal, and Guerrero Chapa was enemy number one. The Zetas' response? Declare an all-out war. They unleash chaos on the Mexican border, killing thousands. Guerrero, now a marked man, flees with his family to the U.S. By 2011, he's quietly relocated with his wife, 2 sons, and daughter in an upscale $1.2 million home in South Lake, Texas. He buys the property under the alias Maji Alheli Diaz de Zira. Nobody in his professional circle knew where he'd gone. He was effectively in hiding. But then came that fatal misstep. He didn't really cut ties with the Gulf Cartel. In fact, this guy was still acting as a cartel shadow leader, while also continuing to hand over intel to the DEA. Now, this ain't just betrayal, but a betrayal on steroids. Keep in mind, this man had more than 20 legitimate businesses in the US, already set for life. But the lure of the underworld, man, it's hard to shake, and it cost him everything. By January 2013, the Zetas had finally gotten a lead. Intel suggested Chapa was hiding somewhere in Texas, so they brought in a hired gun, Rodolfo Villarreal Hernandez, better known as El Gato. This guy wasn't your average sicario. El Gato mobilized an entire Mexican kill squad and went into full spy mode. They used their burner phones, switched rental cars, surveilling Chapa and his kids relentlessly. Eventually, they get their break. They slip a GPS tracker under the car and follow him all the way back to his home. Now they can take him out at his front door. But no, this was personal. They waited until it was public, exposed. And when the hit finally went down in South Lake Town Square, it was swift, calculated, and impossible to ignore. A few hours later, El Gato and his crew tried making a run for it across the border, but the plan fell apart. Authorities stop them and find 3 separate GPS trackers in their possession. It's all the evidence prosecutors needed. Everyone involved in the murder was later convicted. As for Guerrero Chapa, he's buried 6 feet under. His double life, his betrayals, and his secrets sealed with him.